So the real question is, in Indiana, could someone be charged for a crime for not disclosing their status prior to sex if their HIV viral load is undetectable? And we want you to be prepared to answer those questions. Legally speaking, they shouldn't be charged. The problem is we're seeing in our research that practically speaking, people continue to be charged under this law. And we think it's for two reasons. One, people don't understand the change. This includes people living with HIV, but more importantly, defense attorneys and prosecutors and judges. They may not be aware of the change and they may not understand the modern science behind U equals U. A defense attorney can't mount a good defense if they don't understand the law. Second, lawyers tend to be pretty cautious. We don't have cases that went to trial where the science was discussed. Since 2020, when we've had cases where people are charged, even when on treatment and undetectable, the cases are either dismissed or they're resolved through a plea bargain. So we don't have cases where the courts and the judges reaffirm the way the law was written, interpret it correctly, and apply the science. That's known as case law. So until the legal folks start discussing the science of cases and the actual risk of transmission, lawyers tend to be fairly conservative. What they do tell us is that if someone is charged, it would be very helpful to get a new viral load test as soon as possible. Having medical records that show they are undetectable as close to the time of the alleged activity can help. We all know that sometimes clients don't get our viral loads test maybe once every 6 months or once a year. In a court of law, that might seem like a long time. For that reason, it would be helpful to have a recent viral load test to narrow that window down. If you do know of cases or allegations, please encourage people to get a lawyer, and they can reach out to HMM for peer support. The good news is we have research on how these laws are actually being used. We know that from 1998 to 2024, there were about 61 cases of non-disclosure. And as we said before, stigma is probably the biggest barrier to non-disclosure. But we were just surprised in our data to see that this is especially true for men having sex with women. 77% of the cases involve straight heterosexual relationships. So keep that in mind as you're working with your clients. We want to equip everyone to be able to have that conversation when they're required to do so. We also know from the research and looking at the details of the arrest in some of the cases that people continue to be charged for low to no risk activities, even when the law is only supposed to apply to high risk activities. We also see cases where they waive their Miranda rights. They don't understand the importance of having a lawyer. And we'll get into some tips and tricks for your clients a little bit later on. Lastly, we see that more often than not, people are not disclosing. Part of your job as care coordinators and providers is to offer them resources to help them make sure they have the conversation when they're required to do so. One of those resources is the Living with HIV brochure, which clients get on their initial intake with a new care coordinator after being diagnosed. It gives them a lot of information about staying healthy and also explains their legal requirements. Some of the same resources that we share in this presentation are in the brochure. So in 2021, after we changed the law, the Indiana Department of Health implemented a new duty to inform policy that reflects the code changes and better informs people living with HIV about these criminal laws. In the old days, clients would sign the form, and that's very stigmatizing. In the new version, clients don't sign the form any longer. You as the care coordinator or provider, fill that out and file that in your records should it be needed in the future. In 2025, we updated both the form and the brochure to more clearly focus on high-risk activities and to educate and inform people about these changes. Please make sure the agency where you're working is using the latest copy of the forms. You can find those at this website link here. So now let's talk about some questions you might get from your clients. First, how do I actually have that conversation with my sex partner? I shared 2 resources earlier from Pause Magazine and the CDC. These are great resources to share with your clients with tips and tricks on how to have that conversation. Ultimately, it's a personal call when it's safe to do so. Some people do it right away when they first meet someone to get it out of the way. Some people want to wait a little bit before they have that conversation, obviously before they have sex, but to gauge whether or not they can trust the other person. Some people are undetectable and don't want to share as there is no risk and they are not legally required to do so. So it really comes down to their gut, a personal call, when they know the information isn't going to be used against them in some way. If your client isn't comfortable or it doesn't feel safe to have the conversation, there are some resources you can offer them. Remind them of partner notification services from the Indiana Department of Health. It's usually used at initial diagnosis, but IDOH will do this at any time if the person just doesn't feel comfortable. They can also go to this website, tellyourpartner.com. It works for HIV as well as other STIs. They have to know the person's cell phone number, and it's now a paid service, $2.99 per text. You put in the other person's information, and it sends them an anonymous confidential text that says something like, somebody in your network has tested positive, you might want to go ahead and get tested. Of course, if your client does have that conversation, encourage them to document it in writing, or in a text, or in front of somebody else. And we'll give you some tips and tricks on how to do that. Another question that you might get often is, can I press charges against the person I think gave me HIV because they didn't disclose to me? So in general, it's not your job to play traffic cop or have any role in pressing charges or deciding who did or did not disclose. You really have only one side of the story. Your job is to provide resources like the ones being shared here today. Whatever happens, encourage your clients not to call the police. This is never in the best interest of a person living with HIV. It often results in their status being publicly shared in the newspaper, and it's just not good public health approach to supporting people. Remind them that it's very possible that the other person was unaware of their status. 12% of people in the US who have HIV aren't aware of their status. 40% of new cases come from people who are HIV positive and unaware of their status. So that's helpful data to share with them. It's also very possible that disclosure did occur. Again, you're only hearing one side of the story. The good news is that in Indiana, we have an alternative. It's called the ARC program, Advocacy, Responsibility, and Counseling, and it's through the State Department of Health. Brittany will take cases and investigate them, but without involving the legal system. This is a best practice public health response, and we're very fortunate to have it in Indiana. So in 2024, there were 2 cases statewide where somebody was charged with alleged non-disclosure. In the same time, there were 25 cases where the ARC program was used instead of calling the police. So in 25 cases, the police did not show up on their doorstep. On the left-hand side, we know that most of these cases, 76%, were filed by actual clients, usually through their care coordinator or non-medical case manager. On the right-hand side, what we see is Brittany conducts her investigation, and in about 40% of the cases, the blue-green, Brittany found out that these were false reports, some sort of retaliation. There was no conclusive evidence that disclosure was required, so the cases were closed. In almost half the cases, in orange, Brittany found that the reported person was in fact undetectable. She believes the science, she understands the law, so again, the cases were closed. In only 2 cases out of 25, so about 8%, did Brittany have to do any additional follow-up. And again, she takes a very public health sort of approach. If they're in care, she reaches out to their care coordinator and asks them to have a conversation with the person. Hey, I've been hearing some things about Sam that he might not be disclosing. Could you give him a call and have a conversation and just kind of remind him of his responsibility and find out what's going on? So 2 cases versus 25, criminal justice versus public health approach.